How are you doing after this amazing one auction that was like inaugural for the world?
We're feeling great. We're very happy with the results of the one auction, very happy with the results of the Christies Hong Kong July sales, and feeling incredibly fortunate that we managed to get our auctions done before this third wave of COVID hit in Hong Kong. Our auctions were in early July.
Right. What is this that you have placed here on the table?
Sure. So this is the auctioneer's gavel. This is what we use when we are selling our lots. At Christie's, these ones we get gifted them when you become an auctioneer. So each auctioneer gets given one, and these are made in England from a very sturdy wood, and I forget what's the name of the wood. Well, we all have our own gavels, but you know, we do share our gavels sometime. Actually, once what happened was I turned up onto the auction, standing on the rostrum, and then I sold a lot for however much it was, and then right when I was supposed to sell it, I realized I didn't bring my gavel up on stage. It happened to me once, and then someone just walked a gavel up to me, and I just took it and I used it. So we do share, right? But this is mine. So
I've seen some gavels without the handle.
Yes. So actually, all these gavels, you can remove the handle.
Okay.
1 second, and then it becomes like this, and then you can use it. So it's really a matter of personal preference. I used to use it more without the handle before. The reason why I got back to using the handle is I think I was doing some extra training before I did the 舒适 evening sale, and we were modeling a couple of ways how it looked, and we thought this made my arm longer because I'm not very tall, and so that's why I've gone back to using the handle. But sometimes I use it with the handle, sometimes I use it without the handle. Well, okay, so there are many different kinds of auctions. For your simpler auctions, you know, yes, we do a lot of practice when you're qualifying to become an auctioneer, but once you're on a roll, you don't really have to rehearse before each auction. But before the major sales, definitely there's a lot of rehearsal that goes into it. So for the 舒适 sale that I did in 2018, where we sold the most expensive work of art ever sold by Christie's in Asia for $60 million US, I definitely rehearsed. I mean, we rehearsed the entire sale. I knew exactly what I was saying. We rehearsed different scenarios. What happens if there's a lot of bidding? What happens if there's only one bidder? And what happens if, God forbid, nobody bids? So you practice it all.
I see.
Yeah, and definitely for like the one auction, we did a lot of practice. And when you practice, it's not just practicing what you say. They practice your gestures. They practice how you look. They're dress rehearsals where you have to plan your outfit. There's a lot that goes into it, because if you think about it, auctioneering is, yes, it's about the sale, but it's also a lot of drama. And especially for the big evening sales, people expect things to be theatrical. It's a show, and everything down to all the details of how you sound, how you look, they all matter.
But let's go back a little bit. Can you tell us how you got started as an auctioneer?
Sure. So, I mean, Goldman was my first job coming out of college. I think I did the recruiting like many Ivy League grads did, and I ended up at Goldman, which was a great training ground for me. I worked in research, the research department, and it was a great opportunity for me not just to learn about finance, but to learn about what it's like to be a working professional, the attention to detail.
Sure.
Like finance is fabulous training for that. Yes. But you know, that was never where my heart was. I've always loved art history. So my second job, I worked at the development office at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. I really loved working there, being so close to the works of art, and being in New York with one of the greatest museums in the world was such a fabulous opportunity. Then, you know, these happened in my early 20s. Then I went back to school. I got a master's in art history. I went and got an MBA. And after that, what I really wanted to do was two things. One was I wanted to find something that could combine my love of art with kind of this background, this learning in business. And on the other hand, I had to move to London because my then fiance was living there, but my family's here in Asia. So I also wanted to go with a firm that had multiple different offices, so I didn't have to, you know, change jobs again, right? So very luckily, I ended up with a job at Christie's in London in the beginning. And when I moved back here to Asia in 2008, Jonathan Stone, who's our chairman for Asian art now, he was my manager then, and he suggested that I try auctioneer training. So I really have Jonathan to thank. Back then, the firm, mainly when we had our big sales in Hong Kong, all the auctioneers were flown in from overseas. They would fly people in from London, from New York. I mean, this is in 2008 when really the Asian art market was coming up to this amazing new trajectory. And what Christies wanted was an auctioneer from this region who can conduct auctioneers with the local languages. So in 2010, which is exactly 10 years from now, this is my 10th year anniversary as an auctioneer. I went to Christies in London in South Kensington and took my first sale there. And so the first couple sales I took in South Kensington, because that's where, unfortunately, that sale room's now closed, but that's where we sold our lower value lots. But after the first sale, when I came back to Hong Kong, I also started with lower value categories. So my first sales in Hong Kong were in wine. So good thing I speak French, the wine department, and I got on very well because I could pronounce all the chateau names. And so we were selling wines which are, 10,000, 20,000, or even the higher lots were maybe 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. And from wine, you graduate to watches, and then from watches after that, then I moved on to the higher value works of art. Then you take the day sales, and eventually you take the evening sales.
Yeah. Wow. But what are the different requirements of the auctioneers in different regions? Because you were talking about like London or Hong Kong or New York.
Sure. In Hong Kong and in London, you don't need a specific auctioneer license. Essentially, you can get your it's the barrier is really the corporation. So obviously Christie's wouldn't let just anyone come and take an auction, but if tomorrow Mickey Mouse wanted to open an auction house in Hong Kong and become an auctioneer himself, then he could do it. Anyone could go and do it. So it's really the corporation, the firm, that's making the judgment. But in different areas of the world, it's different. In the US, for example, so it's different every state. We had for New York, for Christie's, we got registered with the New York State, and I went there and got registered in 2018. What happens is you go to the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, which is pretty amusing. You have to go all the way downtown, and literally, I was looking at the website this morning. This was a place that gives licenses for car washes, for street fair vendors, for horse-drawn carriages, bingo game operator, and all sorts of
and auctioneers as well.
Technical licenses. So you get registered there, and you have to have 3 character references, and that's it. So again, anyone pretty much, as long as you're not a felon, you get your 3 character references, and you take the subway downtown, and you go get registered. You can do an auction. You can do an auction in New York. There are no tests or requirements. So 2 of the most painful, challenging places to get to become an auctioneer include France and China, in which both cases you have to actually take an exam and get a qualification. So I went through the process for China in 2015, and by 2015 I had already been an auctioneer at Christie's for 5 years. So we tried very hard to lobby to say, considering I have all this experience as an auctioneer, do I really need to go and get a license to become an auctioneer in China? But everyone has to get that license. You can't do the auction without the license. So the process to do that in China involves an exam, of course, and there are 2 parts. There's the written part, and then there is the live part. So you do the written part first, and there were 3 papers. There's auction economics, 拍卖经济学. Then there's a law section, and then there's a 法律, and then there is 拍卖实操. So there is actually just auctioneering and different industries.
Sure.
So the economics part was for me, I had to do everything in Chinese, and I have been studying in an English-speaking environment since I was 15. So my Chinese level is about the 初中程度, and we had to read all these books. And so the economics part wasn't difficult for me conceptually, but I had to learn all these terms like supply,
you have to write
demand,
them,
everything
it wasn't
in Chinese.
Not a multiple choice, it was a written.
So there's a multiple choice section and there's a written section, and I think each exam took 2 hours.
Oh my gosh.
The law part was very specific to Chinese auction law. So there are all these things such as that you had to learn. Like when you do an auction in China, in the rest of the world we often trot. And we might, the auctioneer is able to bid against the reserve, but in mainland China you can't do that. So there are many technicalities that you have to learn. But the most difficult part for me was actually the third part, which comes from kind of auction practice. And the reason is because there were 19 chapters in the book, and art and antiques was 1 chapter. So there were other chapters on debt auction, on real estate auction, on confiscated property auction, secondhand automobiles. So I had to learn all that. So if ever, Christie's decides that, okay, Elaine, they don't want Elaine Kwok as an auctioneer anymore, I can go to China and I can go and sell, agricultural material. Yeah.
What do you think an auctioneer need to pay attention to in a particular sale after all the experience you have?
Sure. So when you train, there's the basic elements of becoming an auctioneer, of getting the numbers right. So you need to obviously know the auction increments, which are roughly 10%. So there's a standard set of increments that Christies follows. So in addition to learning the increments, you have to pay attention to the very, very important figure of the reserve. So the reserve is the price below which a work would not sell. Usually when someone comes to us to sell something, let's say they want to sell this beautiful vase of flowers, or maybe the vase, maybe not the flowers, the vase. There are people who say, oh, please sell it for any price, doesn't matter. Then those would be no reserve lots. But usually people would say, okay, I would sell this vase, but only if you give me $50. I don't want to let go of this vase if you only give me $40.
Right.
In which case $50 would be the reserve. And as the auctioneer, I need to pay attention to the reserve and make sure that I don't accidentally sell it below the reserve, because that would get me in a lot of trouble with the vendor. Then there's also the matter of the absentee bids.
Right.
So an absentee bid is a bid that a buyer or a potential buyer would submit in advance of the sale. It would be their maximum price, but they wouldn't necessarily get it at that price. So for example, if there's a work of art that's estimated for $100,000 to $150,000. Someone puts in an absentee bid at $150,000, which is the high estimate. The general rule here at Christie's is the reserve cannot be higher than the low estimate. So let's say the reserve is at $100,000. Then if nobody bids against this bidder, you would get it at $100,000. But if somebody bids against you, it depends on when that person drops out. If the person drops out at $110,000, you would get it at $120,000. But if the person gets it up to $140,000, then you would get it at your maximum bid of $150,000. And if someone then bids at $160,000, then you would be outbid. But what the auctioneer really needs to pay attention to is because the absentee bidder submits to us the bid in advance, so we give them a little advantage. Normally, let's say if there are 2 bidders at $150,000, both in the room, the auctioneer gets to choose who gets that bid. But if I already have $150,000 in the auctioneer's book, then I need to make sure that the absentee bidder, they have the priority. They will have that bid at $150,000. So as an auctioneer, you need to be very careful. You can't accidentally give the $150,000 to someone in the room, because then your absentee bidder would complain. You need to make sure you end on the right bid step, because if you accidentally end up calling, the bid is with me at $100,000, okay, $110,000, $120,000, $130,000 in the room, $140,000 with the absentee bidder, and then the room bids $150,000, then you've messed up. So there are all these different things you have to pay attention to, which might sound a little complicated, but it's like learning how to drive. So in the beginning, when you learn how to drive, you say, oh, here's a rear view mirror, and here's the brake, and here's I have to then, there's so many things for you to pay attention to. but it all gets easier with practice. After that, once you got all the numbers straight, then you can work on the drama, you can work on the humor, you can work on your engagement with the audience, your gestures, your voice, your pitch,
flair,
everything.
I'm curious, like sometimes I would see an auctioneer's hammer go down, and that's final, supposedly, but then sometimes it will reopen the bid. And why would that happen?
So, well, reopening and the two things. On the hammer is different from reopening a bid. So on the hammer is widely accepted kind of auctioneering practice. Often sometimes when you're bringing the gavel down, at this instant someone will raise their paddle. And in that case you would accept it. It needs to pretty much be instantaneous. Like if you bring it down, and then 1, 2, 3, you're writing down the price, then someone raised a paddle, then no, I would not accept that. But pretty much at the instant when it comes down, if someone raises their paddle, I would accept it. Sometimes the auctioneer is looking at this corner. It does happen that the auctioneer is looking at this
especially
corner of the room.
Especially in a large sale room, yeah.
And you don't see someone raising the paddle. So that's why actually the sales clerk is really, really important. The sales clerk would often serve as someone who can inform me about whether or not this is on the hammer or if this is too late. So I would say this happens actually, most sales I would encounter something like this.
And now with internet bidders, the TV is at the back.
Yes.
Would they actually catch that, or maybe they will be slightly disadvantaged?
No, we would generally catch it. And when you know that you're bidding against an online bidder, you would really pay attention to the online, and you would, I would usually wait a little bit longer, because I do realize that, as amazing technology is, there will be that split second of a lag. So I will wait a bit more if it's with someone online. But my tip, if you are trying to bid on things online, is you make sure you bid early on so that the auctioneer knows that there's an online bidder in the game. Don't wait until the very last minute.
And suddenly,
if I didn't know that there's someone online, I would know to wait.
So how about reopening the bid?
Reopening, that rarely happens. That's much more rare. When I say that on the hammer happens maybe once every 2 auctions, I see that happening. Reopening the bid is very rare, and usually it's because let's say for example, if something doesn't sell, for example, let's say a colleague is trying to call someone on the phone and they were unable to reach the client. If that lot sells to someone else in the room, then that's too bad, that you've missed your chance. But let's say that lot didn't reach the reserve, no one was bidding on it, and then later on you were able to reach a client and the client still wanted the lot, and if it didn't sell, I would reopen it to sell that again, so that we could get a transaction.
Of course. What do you think are some of the important traits of a good auctioneer, and how does one develop into a great auctioneer actually?
Sure. I think you have to be able to think fast on your feet. You have to be able to command the energy of a room. There's a lot of thinking on your feet. You have to be able to read. Is the auction actually a very, very important thing about an auctioneer is pacing. You need to know when it is that the auction has to move quickly. They often say, the first few lots, you're establishing the pace. If you go too slowly, the sale will go on forever. But on the other hand, you want to make sure you're not leaving money on the table, right? Every extra bid means a better price for the vendor. And so its pacing is very, very important. I think that interaction that you can have with the audience is also very, very important. And to go from a good auctioneer to a great auctioneer, a lot of it is practice. And practicing in different scenarios, different situations is very important. So I've taken sales in very small sale rooms here in Alexandra House, where there are just a few people in the room, lots of online, lots of telephones. That's one way of bidding. Taking an evening sale here in Hong Kong, where there are hundreds of people, is a different way of bidding. And of course, this time doing the one sale, where it's this global live stream auctions, where while I'm selling here in Hong Kong, I have 3 colleagues who are also working in 3 other different sale rooms. that's also another kind of experience. When you get to taking kind of the very big evening sales, we did get an acting vocal coach to work with us. We get filmed every year, and then we're made to watch ourselves, and then you're like, oh, okay, I was hunching, I need to stand better, or sometimes I'm only moving my left hand, or etc. So there are all sorts of these sort of things that we can work on to become better auctioneers. If you know a little bit about the works of art that you're selling, that helps. I think getting that little bit of introduction right is very important. You don't want to talk too long, go on and on, then the sale loses momentum. But you want to have something very punchy that you can say that could kind of get the drama going.
Let's use the example that you mentioned earlier about Sushi's painting that you did, which is the highest, most expensive art that you sold. Can you explain a bit more, like that experience there?
That was really an amazing experience, and we knew from the word go that there was going to be a lot of scrutiny on it. So I did a lot of rehearsals. I mean, and the rehearsals really help for you to know exactly what you're going to say before each lot. I sat down with the specialist and we went through what to say.
So somebody will mock, like somebody else would pretend to be the bidder.
Yeah, we had someone pretend to be the bidder. I had two very experienced auctioneers, one from London, one from New York, working with me on the days leading up to the sale. It was quite choreographed, down to the hand gestures. I mean, I remember they told me, they said, okay, right before the 舒适 lot, you take a drink, take a deep breath, and then you go, now here we go, lot 108, the 舒适 or whatever it was, and then you do the sale, right? Then he said, okay, when you're getting to the final lot, you hold it up and you wait for 10 seconds before you bring the gavel down, because you know everyone is going to take out their phones and be taking photos. So
you want to let people
gave everyone their chance to use their smartphones, take their photos, and then I sold it. So there was all sorts of choreography like that, and what I wore was also something that we spent a little bit time, because this was with the classical Chinese antiques departments. They would look at the lucky color for the day, so we found out it was a water day, so I had to wear blue. And there were all sorts of kind of things that went into it to bring us good luck and bring us a good sale, and I'm glad to say that they worked. The bidding lasted for 5 minutes. There were more than 300 people in the sale room, and it sold for almost $60 million US dollars. And to this day, it's the most expensive lot sold by Christies in Asia. So the one sale was an incredibly exciting and challenging experience. The idea was, given COVID, and it's very exciting. COVID gave us an opportunity to do different things, to accelerate working with technology. And the idea was we would have a sale that started in Hong Kong, and then move on to Paris. So Hong Kong started, I think it was 9:30 that night. We did it for half an hour. Then it moved on to Paris, which I think was 3 in the afternoon. Then Paris sold it for half an hour. Then it moved on to London, which was maybe 3:30 in the afternoon. And then it ended with New York in the morning. So this global relay style auction where we deliberately placed the works of art where we think was most likely where we would get the buyers in each respective sale room, but on the other hand, enable this sort of cross-bidding and cross-selling was incredibly exciting. There were 4 auctioneers, and we were present the entire time. So the idea is you conduct the auction as when you're the primary auction in your sale room, like you would most other auctions. But when the auction moves to a different sale room, what you would do is you would help the bidding if there's some bidding in the room, in your home sale room. So if it sounds a bit complicated, it was a little bit. So for auctioneers, we had to do a lot of rehearsals. So I can tell you that maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the auction, we started rehearsing, and often through Zoom online, and again with the 4 different auctioneers in 4 different regions. We had to get our language down similar. We had to rehearse kind of little gestures because we didn't want to talk over each other. So sometimes we had gestures such is, you know, please wait. I have someone who's trying to get in my sale room. Please wait, you know, come back to me later. And we had to get our voices, our styles to match so it could work out. It was a pretty tough week, and you know, Hong Kong, the tough part is the time zones. Every night I was rehearsing from 8 until 10 p.m. and then after the rehearsal, then you would have a debrief on the rehearsal, so going until 11 p.m. and then the following morning at 7 or 8 a.m. I would then have to rehearse with the coach, and then we came into the offices and then we worked a whole day of previews and interest meetings. In terms of physical stamina, that was one of the biggest challenges in my life. You know, it was a show, and I'm so pleased with the show. I mean, the whole sale, we made 421 million US dollars, which is 3.2 billion Hong Kong dollars. It was 94% sold by lot, 97% sold by value. Really great cross bidding. I mean, it was a hugely exciting moment, especially after, you know, as tumultuous of a time as this past spring, to see that the demand is there, that the art market is strong, alive, and kicking, was really rewarding, and I feel very, very honored to have been part of this project, and it was a lot of fun.
What are insights about this global art market can you share with us, especially after your direct experience during that whole thing, the whole one?
Sure. The sales results were, as I said earlier, very strong. I think it goes to show that people really care about art, that the demand and the appetite for the art is definitely still there. Collectors are hungry, they still want to participate. 25% of the value of the one sale went to buyers from Asia, so I was very glad to see our very solid participation. The top lot of the sale, which is Lichtenstein's Nude with Joyous Painting from 1994, that went to the Phone in Hong Kong, and that sold for 46 million US dollars. So Asian participation in the sale was definitely strong. Now, the one sale also happened the same week as our flagship Hong Kong sales, and that sale also did incredibly well. We sold, let's see, 239 million US dollars, which is 1.84 billion Hong Kong dollars, and we sold above our pre-sale high estimate. And everyone entered the sale week with a lot of trepidation. You don't know where the market has landed. There's still all these travel restrictions, so we were not having collectors flying in from all over the world, colleagues flying in all over the world to support. But we saw great results, and not only did the Hong Kong collectors come out in force, this was before our most recent COVID wave, so our sale rooms and our previews were buzzing with people.
Yes, I was so surprised.
But we also saw global buying from 35 countries, with 22% of the buyers were new to Christies. About a quarter of the buyers were millennials, so they were new collectors, young collectors, and all that.
A quarter of that is millennials.
A quarter of them were millennials, and actually near almost 50% increase in online registrations. So it's showing how I think a lot of these trends were coming along, that the art world, that digital technologies were becoming increasingly important, that collecting bases were turning younger and more global. All these were trends that were happening, but I would say COVID's accelerated a lot of them. I mean, I think the first half of the year was very difficult because people didn't know how things were going to work. It was tough to suggest to vendors to sell their lots, but this time we could see that not only was there a demand for art, there was a very deep demand. So you had multiple bidders on each lot. I mean, our top lot, San Yu, I think had 8 different bidders on it. The modern and contemporary art day sale did almost 3 times the pre-sale low estimate. So you had multiple bidders on each lot. That makes us all feel much more positive for the fall, because in the spring what was difficult is you don't know what to do, but in the fall now we're understanding, you know, I don't think the travel restrictions will be lifted anytime soon, but we figured out this sort of new normal and we know how to work it now.